Hi everyone, my name is Charlie and today I want to talk about rereading my own book. As some of you may know, I have now released two books, Our Doris and Indisputably Doris, both featuring the character of Our Doris. And I'm currently working on a novella featuring the two main protagonists in a different setting. Yesterday, I had brought some of the Doris books to work with me for no other reason than I had them in my bag, and I ended up starting to reread a copy of Indisputably Doris. The reason behind this was also because I know that the copies I have a few typos in them, a few errors which somehow slip through the net, and it irks me to know that these still exist and I have 100 copies of them under my bed. Still, I'm still planning to continue to sell these ones in future. You know, these are the ones people are going to want, the few of 100 out of, well, yeah, these are the only ones I'm selling, but you get the gist of things. And I started reading it, and then I ended up kind of captured in my own story, which sounds really bad, but it's been 2 years since I finished writing the book. It's not been 2 years since I finished work on the book, but it has been nearly 2 years since the book was released and I started events. As we know, I gave up events very quickly. If you want to know why, then please do feel free to go back and watch the few weeks of Indisputably Doris that I released on this channel. I found that being able to reacquaint myself with the characters in this way is quite an enjoyable experience, and once again I ended up feeling pride for this book, because I talked about the fact whilst I was writing this book I'd made the decision to include things that I thought were too dark for the first Doris book. Therefore, I felt like I put much more into this book than I had with the first one, and I really enjoy both of the books that I've written. And I suppose I feel a bit more protective of this book because it didn't do so well when it was first released, as opposed to Our Doris, where I sold out of copies that I'd taken to my launch, and then all the books that I'd purchased to kind of keep me going ended up running out, and I had a really successful time with Our Doris. So when Indisputably Doris nosedived incredibly quickly, needless to say, I was a bit sad. However, because of that, I'm also very protective of the book. But reading it yesterday, I couldn't understand why it wasn't as successful, which is very arrogant to say, and I admit that. But it was, for me, it was also this moment of sadness and this questioning as to whether I had become too arrogant, meaning that I thought things were going to be better than they were. And I think that most creative people hope for that. I think that most creative people hope that things are going to be a lot more successful. I put a lot more money and time into Doris 2. I finally managed to figure out how to drive so that I could go to more places. Unfortunately, these things didn't go as planned, but what can you do now 2 years later? And I suppose this is also a revisiting of the second book. I haven't revisited the first book in years because I don't know. I don't know that I thought that book was perfect, but I don't feel as protective of Our Doris. I feel incredibly protective of Indisputably Doris, and I think that it represents what I want to talk about in fiction more. I worry all the time about this book. I worry that it's too dialogue heavy. I worry that There are too many weird similes and metaphors, and maybe the humour should have been a bit different, because I know, and I talked about it throughout the entire writing process, that my humour changed. And reading the book, I don't myself sit there laughing out loud. I'm much more apt to notice my mistakes and the flaws and the things where it could have been improved before I notice anything that I think is good. But I do remember a very prominent part of the writing process to me was being sat in my bed reading what I had written, and realising that I actually liked what I was writing. And as I'm going back over it now, I'm having all this nostalgia for writing this book and putting the characters into new sorts of situations, because I feel like the first book was all about Doris and Harold, and the second book became about the cast. It was much more of an ensemble piece with people coming together in support of Doris. It's one of those things where also, whilst I'm reading it, I'm becoming more aware of the fact that maybe Doris hasn't been the nicest person throughout her life, but I wanted to hold her accountable for that. So the only way that I could do that was by actually having what happens in this book happen. But I've got about 100 pages left to read of Indisputably Doris. I've reached a major climactic point in the book that I remember writing and being absolutely terrified that it wouldn't come across well and it would read like lazy writing. And the Doris books really changed the way that I write, and I feel like I'm not lazier with writing it, because there is a lot of thought going into these books, but I feel like I allowed myself to use my own voice and use a northern voice within these stories that I'd not been allowing myself. And as soon as I gave myself permission to write in this voice, the characters were happy to work with me. That sounds a bit weird, I know, but it's really helped my writing to just admit that I don't have this pretentious voice that I thought was necessary for writing literature. And going over the second book and reading it has really helped me to recognise the voice that I have as a writer, and to hopefully be able to re-engage with it again in order to bring out the fourth and possibly final book in this trilogy. I'm not calling it a quartet. I refuse to call it a quartet. If I release another book with Doris in the future, we could be up to 20 books and it's still going to be called the trilogy, okay? We'll just say that it was a final third part that got cut up into loads of, it got spliced, it got torn apart and released separately. It's postmodern. That's what we will do. We will call it a postmodern Doris if we have to. I refuse to call it anything but the trilogy. But yeah, anyway, I don't know what this video was, except to say that I've been revisiting Indisputably Doris, and I'm planning to now revisit Our Doris and look at my own writing and just be a bit arrogant and wallow in my own filth as a writer, really. Over the bank holiday, I'm hoping to finally meet the end of Doris Ahoy so that I can go back to the start and work on it all again. And I don't know, I'm feeling content again, and that was a good point to be at when I was working on Indisputably Doris. and I'm hoping that it's going to be a good point with this book as well. Anyway, if you're a writer, do you reread your old works? Do you think that revisiting old works can be a hindrance? Because I did worry about that, in that you're constantly going over old ground and thinking about maybe you could have improved something here, that joke there didn't quite land. Even if you don't tell jokes necessarily, something might seem iffy, so you chose not to look at your book again. Or do you think revisiting the writing is something that perhaps shows you how much you've improved as a writer since you wrote that book? Do feel free to discuss all of the things with me in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, that is all.